I am the co-chair of the Imams Council of the Michigan Muslim Community Council and also Imam and President of the Islamic Organization of North America, Iona and Warren. I would like to read to you the press release we just released. Michigan Muslims condemn terrorist acts in Paris and Beirut. Royal Oak, Michigan, 11/14/15. The Michigan Muslim Community Council, MMCC, and the Imams Council of MMCC offer our condolences to the families of victims who lost their lives in the unfortunate tragedies that occurred in the past few days. In Paris, the terrorist actions claimed the lives of over 120 people with more than 300 wounded. And in Beirut, the acts claimed the lives of over 40 people and left more than 200 wounded. At least 3 of the victims were Michigan residents. We condemn in the strongest terms such acts of terrorism that take the lives of innocent people. We stand in solidarity with all communities and people of conscience, undivided against all acts of terrorism and ideologies that promote such heinous acts. May God Almighty help heal the wounds of the injured and grant patience to the families who lost their loved ones. End of press release, and I'll turn it over to
Imams from House of Wisdom. And House of Wisdom is blessed to be a center of unity and love and peace and justice. And during many of the tensions in the last decades, always this House of Wisdom was a source of getting together all Shi'a and Sunni Imams and also Muslim and Christian leaders to have a collective voice of peace and justice for our community, for our country, and the world. I put together a statement that it represents, first of all, my thought, and also I'm the co-chair of Imams Council in Michigan and Imam of House of Wisdom. The barbarian bloodshed in Beirut and Paris and daily terrorist attacks in other parts of Middle East and Africa are all warnings for all of us to take terrorism very seriously. We must demonstrate better determination to stop this aggression and uproot it from its foundation. Since the goals of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and other criminal cults is to create confusion, fear, and division, it is time for greater national awareness, unity, and solidarity to fight this cancer. Though both Muslims and Christians were the targets in Beirut and Paris, we Muslims have the right to be angrier at ISIS and other monsters. Not only the criminals are shedding the blood of our brothers and sisters on daily basis, but they are also attacking our faith and integrity. Just like drug dealers who steal the identity of individuals and use it for criminal purposes, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other criminals are hijacking our Islamic identity and destroying our faith and belief system. Islam is about peace, justice, freedom, and human integrity. But ISIS and other similar evil cults are the enemies of all these values. They are agents of hatred, hypocrisy, greed, destruction, and domination. There is nothing sacred to them. They even attack mosques and places of worship and murder imams and great scholars and men, women, and children who are praying and listening to the recitation of the Quran. ISIS and other terrorists represent the darkness of ignorance, arrogance, evil, and injustice. but not certainly Islam. The Muslim community is targeted by two kinds of terrorism: the physical terrorism by ISIS and the psychological terrorism by Islamophobia. While each and every day in America an average of 44 innocent people are shot or murdered, the media makes no mention to these killers' religious affiliation. But when it comes to ISIS, certain media focus on their faith, not their actions. It seems to me that some media and politicians have problem with Islam, not ISIS. I believe that victory over ISIS can be a matter of weeks rather than years. We all know which countries in the Middle East support ISIS and terrorism in general, with ideology, arm, manpower, and media. We know who is fighting whom in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Afghanistan. In reality, the main sources of support for terrorism in the region are the closest Arab allies to the United States. And the shortest way to win this war is to prevent those allies from empowering all kinds of terrorism, war, violence in the world. President Hollande stated, of French president, stated that terrorist attack in Paris was planned in Syria. The question is how the so-called rebels in Syria all of a sudden turned to terrorists and rewarded their supporters with mass murdering in Paris. Isn't time to learn a lesson? Stop deceiving ourselves and get serious in our fight against terrorism. Let the political destiny of Syrian people be decided by people ballots, not the terrorist bullets. It is unfair and immoral to add more insult to injury of the Syrian refugees and accuse them of terrorism, while they are the real victims of war and terrorism. The Syrian people used to live in peaceful and prosperous country and never planned or desired to leave their country. Let us show them some healing and compassion. Hurting the refugees is helping ISIS, since it is ISIS that wants to catch them and recruit them in their criminal cause. Regarding news of existence of ISIS sleeping cells in Michigan or any other states, if it is true, we ask the FBI and other authorities to act sooner rather than later. It is our religious and citizenship duty to stand against anything that may threaten the security and safety of our community and country. It is a moral obligation of every citizen to report any violent or terrorist move by any individual, regardless of their religion, race, language, and any other identity. Let us remember, it was Zohair, a French Muslim guard, who saved hundreds of lives in recent Paris tragedy with his courage, commitment, and determination. Thank you all.
We also have a press release given by our dear sister, attorney Iman Abdul-Razak. She is the director of the MMCC Syrian Refugee Task Force. She will be representing our response to the governor's request in holding on to the coming of hundreds of Syrian refugees to our beautiful state of Michigan. Sister Iman.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming. So this is the this is the press statement from MMCC. Michigan Muslims urge the governor to welcome refugees in Michigan. The Michigan Muslim Community Council is disappointed that Governor Snyder has decided to pause his support for the resettlement of Syrian refugees in Michigan. After the recent horrific terrorist attacks in Paris, Beirut, and Egypt, it is normal to have fear and care about the well-being of our own families here in Michigan. Instead of falling victim to fear, This should be a time to increase our empathy for victims of violence and extremism everywhere. Refugees from the Middle East already undergo an extensive security clearance process. Unlike in Europe, Syrian refugees aren't sneaking into the United States. They're being processed in over months or even years with thorough background checks and interviews. Over 750,000 refugees have come to the United States over the past 10 years, and none of them have been charged with domestic terrorism. We appreciate the governor's concern about the safety and welfare of Michiganians, but feel that fear is unfounded due to the rigorous screening process already in place. Numerous nonprofits have been preparing for the influx of Syrian refugees to Michigan. We need Governor Snyder to help keep Michigan a state that welcomes refugees and recognizes the cultural and economic benefits that they bring with them. The Arab and Muslim immigrants have reduced crime and improved housing values and tax collection in almost every region they have touched, from Dearborn to Canton to Flint to Hamtramck to Rochester Hills. Over 75% of the refugees are self-sufficient within a few months. In the case of Syrian refugees in Michigan, there are already many nonprofits that are prepared to assist refugees on their path to become fully independent, integrated, and contributing. In an ideal world, displaced Syrians could simply return to a safe, comfortable home in Syria. The harsh reality is that their lives have been turned upside down by over 4 years of terrorism perpetrated by the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad and more recently by ISIS. According to the UN, there are 6.5 million internally displaced Syrians and 4.2 million that have fled their country. Most of these refugees are cared for in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. The global failure to resolve the conflict or to provide a safe haven for civilians to flee to has put us in the position we are in today. By turning people away using the specter of fear, we are turning away the greatest victims of ISIS, the refugees of Syria. We also cast suspicion and dislike towards people with Arab and Muslim backgrounds. Instead, we can do better by showing compassion and kindness and allowing Syrian refugees to call Michigan their new home. Then we will have lived up to our own ideals. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with this illustrious group of faithful members of the Islamic community. These imams are partners to the interfaith community that I represent as chairman of the Interfaith Leadership Council of Metropolitan Detroit. My name is Bob Bruttell, B-O-B, last name B-R-U-T-T-E-L-L. First thing I want to say is that all of the concern that is being expressed right now in our general community should be, from a faith point of view, directed at compassion. These are people who we stand arm in arm with on this stage who have really been hurt by events in the world that have been directed here in terms of Islamophobia and so on. And this is a sad commentary on the values of our community. Our community needs to show compassion at this point. Our community needs to express to those leaders in the political community that they need not express our base fears. Our base fears do not represent us well. We have a commitment to the health and welfare of our people here, whether they're immigrants or whether they've been living in America since the Mayflower. We need to show these people the kind of thing that we call the American dream. What does the future look like? Secondly, we need to use this opportunity to teach others around us that the hijacking of Islam is a serious problem for the community of Muslims, but it should not give rise to any kind of Islamophobia. Americans that stand on this stage with me are as much committed to American ideals as any other person. They have condemned and condemned and condemned the terrorism that's going on in the world, and yet every day I am asked, when will those people condemn terrorism? Well, you've heard it again today, and you've heard it over and over again, and I hope that this is a time when we will begin to realize that these are our friends. They are faithful people with wonderful values. They are living in our community, and they are contributing to our community, and we need to come to their aid at this time in history when things are not being expressed in very positive ways. And so the interfaith community stands arm in arm in trying to express our American values as well as our faith values, and to show compassion. Thank you.
President and CEO of the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion. So 75 years ago when our organization began, we stood with Catholic immigrants who were being treated similarly to our people who have come to this country from the Muslim Arabic world. Today we stand with our neighbors, our sisters and brothers who are newly arriving, or for some who've been here for well over 100 years. Two things to add to Bob's comments. The key to prejudice behavior is our relationships. The problem with Southeast Michigan is we've got a lot of people developmentally delayed. They've grown up in homogenous communities and haven't formed relationships with people who are different. Certainly, too many people don't have friends who are Muslims. They may have coaches and teachers and physicians who are Muslim, but they really don't know someone who's Muslim. So the first challenge is reach out through the programs of the Interfaith Leadership Council, through your local mosques, and come to know at a personal level someone who is Muslim. Your heart will do the rest. Secondly, it's time to speak out against the accepted narrative that there's something wrong with Islam. I hear it on our television shows. I see it far too many places. So as you form relationships and develop fidelity and friendship with your Muslim community, stand up for them, because to not stand up at your Thanksgiving tables and in other places is to agree by your silence. The faith of Islam is I'm trying to be careful about my words, but to say that it is a great world religion, and it has got followers that help people see how it is as equal as any other religion. And so to not stand for them is to not stand for anybody. So stand up this holiday season and moving forward, and thank you for your leadership.
After terrorist attacks like we saw in Beirut and Paris, how difficult does it become for everyday Muslim Americans to live their lives when we have attacks like this? How difficult has it been for your families, your friends?
Well, the terrorists want us to be scared. They are fear-mongering forces. And it's time for us to focus on our unity, solidarity, working together, Muslim, Christians, all faith traditions, because we have a common enemy. And terrorism is against Islam, against Christianity, against Judaism. They are killing Muslims, they are killing Shi'ite, they are killing Sunnis, they are killing Christians. So we have a common enemies, and this is a dangerous movement in the world. We all need to be strong, be serious, be determined, working together to defeat the roots of this evil identity terrorism.
Make no mistake that these events do affect our communities. I personally make sure that our congregations are alert, because there are people in our communities of other faiths and what have you that want to do harm. After these attacks, we had seen nails in our parking lot, for example. Among other things they may do that, we're not sure what they will do. However, we make sure that our congregations are well aware of the situation, so they may take the necessary precautions so they are not hurt by individuals who are ignorant, if you know what I mean. Particularly our sisters, because they are easily identified by their scarves.
My question to you is about the prejudice within and sectarianism within the Islamic communities. After the Beirut attacks, we've seen a rise of sectarian comments we've seen some people even advocate against refugees from our own communities. So how would you address that?
I mean, that's exactly what ISIS wants. ISIS wants us to be divided according to sectarian or religious lines. And it's unfortunate that even in, like you said, in places like within our own community, sometimes we have people who fall into that trap and might advocate themselves against the refugees. But I call upon them to think as an American. As an American, it is unacceptable to be against immigrants and refugees when, other than Native Americans, that's what we all are at the end of the day.
To respond to your question, any discussion or talk about Sunni and Shia in the context of our stand against ISIS, I believe is irrelevant. One day before the Paris attack, there was another deadly attack in Beirut, right, that targeted Muslims, mainly Sunnis and Shiites. So we are all in agreement. It's very clear to us. ISIS does not represent Sunnis, does not represent Shiites, does not represent any religion. They are using a religion to justify their evil activities. So, as we all know, terrorism does not know any race, religion, borders, or even have no God. So we have to be very clear about this. It is not a Sunni-Shia issue, although some try to portray it as such, but we are all here standing against this evil ideology, which I would argue one of the most extreme groups in modern history.
And even to call ISIS Muslims, that's a big insult to Islam, because they are not even Muslims, they are monsters. And
So we are a part of this community, and so we are just as concerned about the safety of everyone in Michigan and in the U.S. generally. So that is a concern that we have taken into account. But there are already security measures that are in place. The State Department has been doing this for a very long time. This is not something new. We didn't just decide to take in refugees. The State Department's procedures are very extensive, and especially for people coming from the Middle East, it takes an additionally very long time. It takes about 18 to 24 months just to get the security clearance for somebody to come in. And the individuals that are going to be arriving in the United States throughout this year are people who have fled Syria a very long time ago. These are people who maybe have applied to become a refugee 2, 3, 4 years ago, and during the very early stages, before we were even talking about ISIS. These are people who suffered in the Civil War, and who left, who might be in Lebanon, who might be in Jordan, who might be in one of the refugee camps, and they have applied to come here, so that they are, they've already suffered tremendously, and I think the State Department has been handling it very well. And if they find that there are any gaps, we hope that they fill those gaps, but we leave that up to the discretion of the State Department.
Family members of victims who were killed in the terrorist attacks are coming out and saying, ISIS will not have our hatred. ISIS will not force us to hate Muslims. We will continue to love and cherish our brothers and sisters in spite of what has happened. Does that give you some hope that there are...
it does. That's very dignified and honorable position from the clean conscience of these people, that they deal with every community with individuals rather than their religion or their language, their race, but each individual, and based on the actions of individual rather than their faith traditions. And I think that's something that we all must do, to be fair, to be just, to be objective, and deal with every individual as human beings before being Christian or Muslims or Jewish or Shia or Sunni as human beings.
I feel ISIS are not only being non-Muslim, they're not being also non-humans. And we really need to work together to treat this phenomenon. We're like all here in Michigan, United States, all over the world, we're really suffering from this phenomenon. And it's time to work together. It's not time for hatred, because the main policy of this type of organization is to spread hatred. If we do that, we're doing the exact thing that ISIS is trying to achieve. We really need to work together. We're here, part of Michigan, we're part of this spot, and we have concerns too, we have fears. We need to work together, all of us, against this phenomenon. Thank you.
I would be remiss to stand amongst you with this distinguished group of imams and not raise a voice. And that voice is of an individual who happens to be Muslim, who happens to be an imam, who happens to be African American. Because oftentimes what's missed in this discourse about terror and about what's taking place and about what's happening in Paris, and there's not an individual in here, the press and the people on this podium who are not feeling a sense of loss for those lives in both Beirut and Paris. Anytime that you have a single human life, that's upsetting. It should be upsetting to the entire world community. But at the end of the day, for us to continue to point to what has admittedly been said is a small group of people hell-bent on destroying civilizations and then allow that to be linked to a body of people, 1.5 billion people in the world, and there constantly being a request of the Muslim community to apologize for the actions of a separate group of people. What I would ask from the press this morning is that as you go back and you print and you go to your media and you disseminate to the American public, that you do that in fairness to a reality. And that reality is very simply that terrorism exists in all forms and fashions. When a young man walks into a church, shoots, reloads, shoots again, denies the pleas of people, that's terrorism. When you wake up and you read the newspapers around the United States and you see young lives, white lives, Hispanic lives, brown lives, black lives that are being taken on a daily basis, that is a form of terrorism. What we need to do is have an honest discourse that says very simply, there is a reason why people are fleeing Syria. It's Syria today. What will it be tomorrow? What was it yesterday? This is a question we have to ask ourselves. And then honestly and objectively, we need to sit down and put together policies on the national level, on the international level, that addresses those issues. And then we won't have a need for having these kinds of gatherings, these kinds of press conferences.